This is the American Law Journal.
The 45th President of the United States has been sworn in. Is America ready for its civics lesson? This week on the American Law Journal, some rejoice, some recoil at a Trump presidency. Are we facing a constitutional crisis? In a word, yes. But this card has been in the American deck for years, and its number has just come up. Gina Passarella explains.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Donald Trump, as a successor to George Washington, has left most of us, including lawyers and law professors, with an opinion.
The largest concern has to be that we have somebody in the White House who doesn't seem to have a strong grasp of what the rule of law means, who doesn't seem to understand the Constitution, and that's got to be concerning.
Predictions of doom, I'm not quite there yet.
Trump assumes power with the nation at its most polarized in generations, summoning a reminder from a former Supreme Court justice.
Franklin was asked by someone, I think, on the streets of Philadelphia shortly after the 1787 Convention adjourned, what kind of government the Constitution would give us if it was adopted. And Franklin's famous answer was, a republic, if you can keep it.
I see a new nation ready to take its place in the world. Not an empire, but a republic. And a republic of laws, not men.
The rule of law. The founders established it as our nation's cornerstone. But by any measure, the three branches of government, like America's infrastructure, have been showing signs of wear for some time. Greater power assumed by the presidency under both George W. Bush and Barack Obama. A dysfunctional, if not obstructionist, Congress. And the failure to appoint a Supreme Court justice for the longest period in our history. Will a Trump presidency rehabilitate these institutions, or cause them to fall further into crisis?
I am concerned in particular about press access to public debate, issues of public policy, access to the functioning of government. I'm not saying that there aren't aspects of the traditional media that don't reflect some kind of bias, and I think that's a problem. But the idea of allowing the information of government to come forward only in a tweet that's controlled by one person is tantamount to state media.
For those most concerned, the First Amendment tops the list. A war on the media and allegations of Lügenpresse, or lying press.
You are fake news. Sir.
Relaxing libel laws.
We can sue them and win lots of money.
Diminishing First Amendment protections for flag burning, even the ability to peaceably assemble. Other concerns based on Trump's statements include judicial independence, violating Muslims' equal protection under the law, and promises of reviving torture and stop and frisk. These concerns, if realized, could further weaken our democratic institutions and cede more power to the president. If so, what is the role of lawyers and judges?
I don't worry about our losing Republican government in the United States because I'm afraid of a foreign invasion. What I worry about is when the problems get bad enough, as they might do, for example, with another serious terrorist attack, as they might do with another financial meltdown, some one person will come forward and say, give me total power and I will solve this problem. That is the way democracy dies.
Fortunately, we still have an independent judiciary, and it is our obligation as members of the bar to take that very seriously and to use all of our talents and resources to make sure that the law is enforced and enforced equally throughout the land.
It's important for all of us to remember that we have three branches, that we have a federal government and a state government, that we have cities and localities. There are lots of different places that we can have impacts on what people's lives look like.
It is no small thing to build a new world, gentlemen. We have our republic. We must endeavor to keep it, if we can.
Trump isn't without his supporters from the legal community, with many lawyers helping his transition team and serving as his senior advisors. But there's a large contingent of the legal community who feel they have a duty to stand up for the rule of law, which they say is under attack in a Trump administration. For the American Law Journal, I'm Gina Passarella.
All right, four guests with me tonight, lots to cover. Mark Aronchick joins us for the first time. He is a litigator and chair of the Hangley Aronchick law firm. He was actually one of the first legal boots on the ground in what would later become the Bush v. Gore matter. Claire Finkelstein is a professor of law and professor of philosophy at UPenn Law. She is the director of the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law at UPenn. Sheryl Axelrod is a litigator and a top 100 super lawyer in her state and the chair of her certified women-owned law firm. And the Honorable Edward Cahn graces us with his presence once again, as he's been doing for many years, former Chief Judge of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and the federal courthouse in the Lehigh Valley bears his name. Let's get a punch list going here. In our recent past, we've had an obstructionist Congress far beyond its role as a noble adversary, the sanctioning of torture as somehow constitutional, a vacancy on the Supreme Court for almost a year, longest in our history, pervasive, some would say perverse gerrymandering, an unprecedented executive power, the so-called unitary executive. Claire Finkelstein, this ecosystem may have been one that Donald Trump has emerged from, but he didn't create it.
No, that's right. I think this has been in the works a long time, but particularly since 9/11, when you had the Bush administration declaring that there was a new category of combatant called unlawful combatants, when you had the lawyers from the Office of Legal Counsel engaging in legal gyrations to try to explain the legality of what was, I think, even at that time clearly illegal, namely the use of torture, why enhanced interrogation techniques were not torture when clearly they were. So then you had the Obama administration, Obama turning around and saying that we ought to look forward, not back, and the failure to vindicate the rule of law, passing up that opportunity that he had, did a lot of damage.
I think we have to be very careful when we define the word crisis. We don't have a situation right now, and we haven't really had one, on the kind of crisis that I grew up on, like a Richard Nixon simply defying and saying, I'm not going to turn over subpoenaed documents. I'm simply not going to do that. We have people who have tested the Constitution way beyond, in many cases, what we recognize. But we have a system that brought them back in. It may be that the Senate and the House under Obama blocked a lot of what he was doing, but they were elected for a reason to do that. And where they were wrong, or where Obama tested his powers, the court stepped in and sorted those out. We haven't yet had a complete defiance of the rule of law, because the rule of law is ultimately what the courts say it is. We haven't had that. I don't know if we're on that precipice now, but we certainly have a target-rich environment to figure that out.
Mark, I would have to actually disagree with you on that, because I think that just as we've seen in the last few days the idea of alternative facts, we lived through two administrations with a willingness to adopt alternative law. And the whole idea that the law constrains what we do, rather than that the law is somehow a tool that we can use in fighting terror, is already, to me, a signal that we have a kind of rule of law crisis in this country.
Well, if rule of law crisis means people stretching, their arguments, okay, I'm with you. I mean, because we had a lot of argument stretching both ways in the last 20 years. Well, but to me, the crisis really is...
Exaggerating facts is not a crisis in the law.
That's what I mean. We've had a court system that's pretty much been doing their job. And to me, the crisis is when people start disregarding that. See, I still believe that we can straighten out the problems by going to the court system. I'm a lawyer. I think plenty of lawyers believe that as well. And I haven't yet seen judges abdicating their responsibility, and I haven't seen executives or Congress people saying, I'm not going to follow what the judges say. That would be China maybe or something, but that hasn't been in the United States yet.
Mark, I have to add to this that we really do have a break in the rule of law. When you have torture going on, that's a break in the rule of law. When you have a president who nominates a Supreme Court justice and a GOP-controlled Congress that refuses to even vote on that individual, That is a break in our entire history. It has never happened before.
But it's not a rule of law violation. There's no law that says that they have to do that.
Yes, it's just advise and consent, Judge, but you'd have to say it's a break from our traditions, and wouldn't you say our institutions are fraying if we have a president in power, he was duly elected, he had a full year to put a person in place who, by all standards, was a consensus choice, quote unquote, Orrin Hatch. Doesn't that show a fraying of our institutions?
I don't think so. I think it was appropriate for the majority leader of the Senate to be a politician.
I have to disagree. I think we have a history in this country of abiding by certain rules. And when a president nominates someone for the Supreme Court, the rule is that Congress shall advise and consent. And I think that when you break with all of these traditions that we're talking about, you get to the point where people don't believe that there is any rule of law anymore. And that is the real problem.
With deference to Sheryl, I want to say that although I think it's a serious problem that the Senate did not even consider Merrick Garland, the fact that they did not and had the full opportunity to do so, I cannot call that a rule of law problem, but I think it's a rule of law problem that Obama did not respond by saying, you had the opportunity to consider this candidate and you failed to take that opportunity.
Well, I wonder what would have happened if President Obama had, in fact, said, look, when you're in recess, I'm going to just put you on the Supreme Court, and then it would have gone to the Supreme Court deciding whether or not that was constitutional, and we didn't get to that point.
I want to play a short clip here from something that we taped at the National Constitution Center, and this was 10 years ago. I want to warn you that a professor from Villanova uses the F word.
And in the conduct of a war, the laws fall silent, the Supreme Court falls silent. When President Lincoln wants to suspend habeas, no sitting court while it's happening is going to do anything about it. When President Roosevelt wants to round up every Japanese person on the West Coast and put them in concentration camps, that's what happened.
Listen to yourself. You are defending some of the most ignominious episodes in American history.
They may be ignominious, but they are not unconstitutional.
Your argument is on its face a defense of autocracy, a defense of a slide into fascism, and we cannot allow that.
Steve brought it up. He said for you guys it comes from
I'm sorry, your rhetoric is overheated rhetoric. You're talking about an absolute presidential power in time of war.
Okay, maybe that wasn't the F word you thought, but does that warning have some sense of prescience now that we're looking at the possibility of an autocratic government or the semblances of autocracy in our nation?
And I agree that that is the possibility. There are early warning signs now that we might be into an era unlike anything we've just gone through. Because, for example, the executive orders that the president says that he's going to now sign and repeal everything that was ever done on his own, a Congress that seems compliant in that. You know, we're going to change libel laws, First Amendment laws. We're going to go back to torture, even though it's already been well examined as not being proper, and we've been abiding by that examination. There are early warning signs, but I am of the belief that there also are resources, lawyers, public officials, and a court system that we can use to check that and to test that out. And so I'm optimistic about where we're going in terms of being able to fight back on that authoritarian tendency.
I want to be clear in responding as well to Mark's earlier point. I'm also of the view that there's a lot that we can rely on to fight back against the potential slide into autocracy. And in my view, there are three potential saving graces here. One is actually the military. They're trained from day one in the concept of the rule of law, and the military swears to uphold the law and to defend not the country, but the Constitution. The number two is the press, because I think that the press is now really stepping up to the plate. And the third one is the judiciary, and on that I agree with Mark, though I don't agree with him that there has been no abdication of responsibility. I do think we have seen some very concerning trends in the judiciary.
I'm pleased that there seems to be agreement that the third branch has some muscle to deal with the problems you perceive. I'm not agreeing with you that those problems are there, but if you're right that there's unconstitutional actions by the current government, I'm confident that the third branch will deal with it.
You know, there have been questions in the bar associations about how big law is going to react to all of this. Some people might say, well, they may be looking at which side their bread is buttered on. But this is a quote from W. Michael House, who was with Hogan Lovells. And this was printed up in the American Lawyer magazine recently. He said, I think one of the things our founding fathers were most concerned about is that there would come a point when people are so upset that they run over the institutions put there to protect them. The rule of law will come under attack in the future. I don't think the bar as a collective group is ready to deal with it. I don't see organizations coming together. Opinions?
I think that there is an enormous interest right now in the big law firms in New York, in Washington, even in Philadelphia, to find the pro bono cases that those firms can bring. They know they have ethical responsibilities under the ethics code. They will step up and fulfill those responsibilities. They're businesses, no question. And they're going to have to go through conflicts and all that kind of thing.
But you're confident they're going to step up?
I think they will. I think what's missing right now is a leadership that's organizing that effort. I think that we need to see more Bar Association leadership, more public interest.
Well, the American Bar Association dipped their toe in it and they pulled it right back.
But it's going to happen. Some combination will bring those resources together as we see what this administration is actually doing, rather than imagining what they're doing, when we see what they're actually doing.
All right, coming up, what about the First Amendment under the Trump administration? What can not only lawyers and judges, but we the people do to preserve our constitutional values? And what can we learn from the Russian problem that we faced in the 1950s? We'll be back in just a moment.
This week's American Law Journal is made possible in part by Law Catalyst, video and film production for the legal profession. Go to lawcatalyst.com. King Spry, serving its Pennsylvania clients in family law, business, personal injury, and school law for over 30 years. Blank Rome, providing strategic advice for employers in today's workplace. Beatty, Sloan, and DeGenova, providing consumer protection in injury matters for over 30 years. Swartz Cullington PC, a personal injury law firm that concentrates on safeguarding the wounded. Get the justice you deserve. And The Legal Intelligencer, an American lawyer media publication and the oldest law journal in the United States.
I don't believe there is any problem of American politics and American public life which is more significant today than the pervasive civic ignorance of the Constitution of the United States and the structure of government.
The rule of law in the era of Trump, what role will judges, lawyers, and you, we the people, play in coming years? And what does any of this have to do with Sputnik? You know, back in the 1950s, of course, Russia beats us into space with Sputnik. What did we do? We responded, right? So we started shifting our education. We started looking at science and technology. We get Kennedy in there. He says we're going to get to the moon first. Let me put this on the table. I think we're facing a crisis almost as grave as what we faced in the 1950s, but it's not science and technology, it's civics. Don't take my word for it, take David Souter's word for it, take Sandra Day O'Connor's word for it. Here are just a couple of facts. 2/3 of the people in our country don't know that there are 3 branches of government. 40% of millennials believe that limits on free speech are okay. Most of them are getting their news from Facebook. Only 55% of the electorate voted in the last election. The crisis in civics, Claire, is just as big as the scientific one in the 50s, I submit.
I think that's right, though I don't know if it's a matter of ignorance, but a failure of comprehension at the level of value. Because we're so used to thinking of politics as a boxing match and have so little in the way of comprehension of the deeper values that ought to be guiding both sides of the aisle. Now, I think to some extent we have been implicitly throughout our history guided by very fundamental values that are now coming under attack for the first time. And suddenly we realize the extent to which politics has been relatively civilized.
Such as, Claire, give me 1 or 2 examples. You may have already discussed them.
Well, certainly the attacks on the press have surprised many, many people. We've taken for granted the idea that the press is protected, that the freedom of speech is protected. There's been legislation proposed in a number of cities to actually outlaw peaceful demonstrations. There was a report the other day of a Canadian unable to enter the United States when he said that he was coming for the March on Washington. So we are not used to having speech and freedom of the press come under this kind of attack from political leaders, and that is a game changer.
Judge, I'd like to get your feedback on this. Are we facing a civics problem here in this country?
I see a civics problem, but not the problem that's been identified. The civics problem is that our schools are so bad that the students are not taught civics properly. And when I was in school, we had a very good civics program, and today the students, half of them don't understand the three branches of government. We don't have a problem of people attacking the press. You have a constitutional right to say that the press is wrong. You may be factually wrong, but you can say that. That's not a constitutional crisis.
My concern is not that the Trump administration is saying that the press is wrong. It is the attacks on free reporting and investigative journalism, certainly in the run-up to the election, post-election, and now the Trump administration is starting to talk about changing access on the part of the press and trying to...
I don't see anything in the Constitution about a right to have a press conference.
Well, that may be true, Judge, but does it concern you as a U.S. citizen, for example, that they're moving the press corps out of the White House and into an adjacent building? Now, some may say much ado about nothing. Sometimes the symbol is more tangible than the act itself.
I'm hoping that the country has enough civics education to deal with that issue at the polling place.
What I'd like to do is go around the horn. Okay, final comments, if you will. Sum up. I'd like to know what you think we should do, depending on the degree of crisis. So, Mark, you first.
Okay. I think that President Trump and the Republican House and Senate are going to do exactly what they've told us they're going to do. They're going to strip back, in one way or another, all of the things that they campaigned against. Climate change, EPA regulations, Obamacare, immigration policy. They're going to condition local police departments to do more law and order in return for their grants, not less. They're probably going to tinker with voting rights. They're going to defend their gerrymandering. They're going to have litmus tests on judges. They're going to do a lot of things that they said they're going to do. They've told us. What's my reaction to that? My reaction to that is I will be appalled. However, I also, I think, will be energized by what I have seen in the last, weeks and days of a public outpouring to say we're not going to stand for that, and plenty of opportunities to do something about it. Lawyers, the legal profession we talked about, a judiciary that right now I think is sensible and balanced and fair for the most part to do something about it, public officials at the local and state level to fight back, citizens movements, people demanding rights, women's rights, LGBT rights. We're going to see a lot of that dialogue. It's going to energize a lot of people. And I think in the end of the end, it's going to be a fight that will actually, I think, move the needle towards justice.
Good for democracy.
Good for all of us.
Sheryl Axelrod.
I was watching with my husband a documentary on the rise of Hitler. And there are so many parallels to the current state in our country. Hitler rose on a platform of making Germany great again, just the way Trump rose on making America great again. And already he's in violation of the Emoluments Clause. He has not declared the businesses and the assets that he has. We don't have his tax returns. We don't even know all of the assets he has across the country and across the world. He's pledged to institute stop and frisk, as Mark was alluding to, which we all have already seen.
So what do lawyers and what do citizens do moving forward if this is what you're seeing?
Well, it's very frightening. I think that Mark is right, that as lawyers, we need to take action. We need to file lawsuits. And we also should be on programs like this educating the public. So when we were talking about the education of the public and how little people know in terms of civics and how our government works, we're living in this time of an echo chamber where people who think like you do are the ones you're listening to and watching and reading their posts on Facebook and in Twitter. And you're not seeing any other points of view. And the problem with that is that you may be getting a very narrow slice of the truth.
So get off of Facebook and maybe meet that person face to face, I think, as the former president said. Judge, what's coming next, do you think? I'm going to ask you to look at the crystal ball. And what do we do?
I need to fight with my panelists. First of all, the electorate elected Trump on the basis of his platform, which they object to. So their problem is at the polling places. Before the session, they told me they don't like the Electoral College, but that's in the Constitution, and whether they like it or not, that's what it is, and that's the way we operate. Both parties operate under it and can deal with it. If they're right with their doomsday predictions, then the third branch will protect the populace from excesses.
So we can depend on those institutions, Judge, is what you're saying.
Definitely.
Thank you. Claire Finkelstein, last words.
I do believe that there is a grave threat to the rule of law. And what I'm wanting to see is the law fight back. I want to know whether or not our legal institutions and our constitutional tradition is robust enough to push back against the shifting boundaries that we're seeing with regard to what it means to adhere to the law. If we do manage to reinstate law, again, by using law to do that, the very serious damage that I think we'll be left with long term is in a way more on the ethical side than on the legal side. The violation of personal ethics, the conflicts of interest, the personal characteristics, and the example that has been set not only by Donald Trump himself, but by so many of his associates and some of his cabinet picks, sets an example for the next generation and constitutes an education all in and of itself.
Well, rest assured that in the upcoming weeks, months, and years ahead, that we at the American Law Journal are not just going to be looking at bankruptcy and domestic relations and civil litigation, which is part of our charge, but our charge as well is to empower we the people to understand our constitutional rights and responsibilities, something that we take very seriously. I want to thank my guest tonight, Mark Aronchick with the Hangley Aronchick Law Firm in Center City, Philadelphia. Claire Finkelstein, hailing from University of Pennsylvania's Law School and the director of the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law. Sheryl Axelrod, litigator, top 100 super lawyer from Pennsylvania. And as always, the gracious, honorable Edward Cahn, who's been joining us here on the program now for about 15 years. For all of us here at ALJ, thank you for joining us. Until next week, case closed.